12. Spiritual and mystical experiences. Mystical or spiritual phenomena present people with a glimpse of the other side, of the real world. They can occur through meditation, prayer, nature, near-death experiences, or in many other ways. Occasionally, they occur during sleep, in dreams, and in that period of time just before falling asleep or awakening, before consciousness is reached. Those habits and patterns that bring us to such transcendent moments may work well for one person, but not as well for another. It is important to find the path that works for you. The use of drugs, whether hallucinogenic ones or other types, can provide a superficial encounter with these higher levels, but there will not be a complete understanding of its nature. For this reason, among others, I do not recommend using drugs to bring about these states. The glimpse that such otherworldly experiences provide us are extremely valuable, for they offer insight into the true nature of mind and of being. Such insights show the permanence of existence beyond the body, beyond the brain. They allow us to reach enlightenment. They show the beauty and the wisdom of the process, or the Tao, or the flow, which is always there, which is always right. The process is guided, perhaps, by a divine presence, often reaching down to us through an act of grace to nudge us back to our destiny and to help us with the lessons that we came here to learn. The stories in this chapter present a wide variety of such experiences, from the earthly to the distinctly unearthly, yet all the roads lead back to the same place, a life-transforming recognition of our soul's essence. Some features of the mystical or spiritual event are a feeling of oneness with all that is, of an energy that connects everything. There is a sense of timelessness, of infinite patience. With the understanding of such an occurrence comes an increase in one's ability to reach out and help others without expecting anything back in return, and to approach each person and each situation with grace, kindness, and tolerance. There is peace. There is joy and happiness. Frequently, there are also increased intuitive abilities and a knowledge of things that are unknowable by use of the five senses, which may include psychic and healing abilities. This is true for all great spiritual traditions. The most significant characteristic, however, is love. It is an unconditional love, rather than one that is romantic or specific. One realizes that this kind of love is everlasting, eternal, and not subject to the laws of human nature or of the earth. It can never be lost. It is a universal constant. To illustrate this, imagine a mother's love for her baby, or a person's love for a dear pet. The baby or the pet does not need to perform in order to win love and acceptance. It is there no matter what the child or the animal does. It is deeper than that. It is profound. It has no conditions. It knows no limits. And neither do we. Indra's Net. One night during the professional training that I attended at the crossings in Austin, Texas, I had a dream unlike anything I have had before or since. In it, I was one of millions of octagonal disc-shaped objects, which traveled at light speeds to and from Earth's surface to an outer universe above it. As we left Earth with information about this planet, we would approach a vortex-type opening, shaped like a funnel, and we would begin a swirling circular pattern as we entered it. Once we passed through the long tube into the universe, we would straighten out and, upon coming out at the other end, would intersect and join with others in what appeared to be a blanket made up of millions of us. We then discharged our information and swirled back down to Earth through the vortex, going the other way and retrieving more information. This pattern repeated over and over. I woke from this dream in the process of doing a very specific hand motion, which at the end of the dream was being given to me as a means of communication with the blanket or net above Earth. There was one motion that tied my visual and emotional content to the net, and one motion to disconnect. I have used these hand motions ever since to connect with this net and disconnect from it, with the purpose of providing the net with the human experience. It was clear to me that the net held and does hold all of the knowledge of the universe, and that what I am to provide it is the emotional component. As an example, if I am having a thought that I find disconcerting, I will connect and let the net feel that emotion. Then I disconnect. At first I only connected on good things, but I soon recognized that the net was non-judgmental and not an assessor of good or bad thought. Thus I began, and still do, communicate anything that I find to be unusual, good, or bad about the human condition. Now, I must add that I work with the severely mentally ill, particularly the schizophrenic population, and I would likely say that someone was psychotic or delusional for engaging in such things as I am describing. However, the dream happened, the information was received, and, right or wrong, I feel obligated to do as it revealed I should. Trust me, I'm sitting here shaking my head as I write this. The morning after I had the dream, I awakened and relayed it to my wife. Let me interject at this point how the whole ordeal was feeling. Have you ever jumped off of a cliff or high-dived into water far below? The first time I ever did, I felt exhilaration coupled with complete helplessness upon having left the board. This is how the events of the week with Dr. Weiss felt at that point. I had been on a perfectly sound diving board and had bounced up and down a few times. However, upon finally leaving the board, there was no turning back. Emotions were running the gamut from complete and utter wonder to panic, and everything in between. That day I was in search of some coffee on a break and went around to the back side of the building, where I stumbled across Brian and Carol as they too were taking a break. Carol kindly said that they were interested in my experience and asked me to relate it to them. I did so briefly, as I felt that surely they heard this stuff all the time, and that what I considered life-altering for me was probably common news to them. However, they took honest interest, and Brian mentioned having heard of something in India's history about a net above the world. This, of course, turned out to be Indra's net, and the descriptions that I have read about it on the Internet are quite similar to my experience. Brian also remarked that the communication process with the net was a gift given to me. I had not thought of it that way. I saw it more as an obligation. Now I realize that the two are not mutually exclusive, and that an obligation can indeed be a gift. The seminar gave me immediate empathy for Brian and the emotions that he must have felt while keeping the regression information quiet in the early years. Like him, I did not tell many people about any of my experiences, particularly of the net, until now, of course. Interestingly, those I have told about it have often responded with an awareness of something beyond the limits of Western organized religion, and I've been grateful for their position. I wish to say that the seminar and this experience rocked my safe little boat, and I know now that it needed to be rocked, for which I am beyond grateful. I have a long way to go, but at least I have no fear of the path anymore. Raymond Wilson. As Raymond progresses rapidly on his spiritual path, he is simultaneously sharing the details of his experiences and thus helping many others on their own paths. On that day in Texas, when Carol and I were taking a break on the back porch, Raymond came looking for some coffee. He then proceeded to accurately describe the image and concept of Indra's net, about which he had never heard or read anything. In his earnest manner, a portion of his mind thinking that he must be weird, he described a 2,500-year-old concept about the holographic interpenetration and the interconnectedness of all things and all beings. Although Raymond is an incredibly down-to-earth person, what he relayed was as far from earth as possible. He had no idea that these ancient Hindu and Buddhist concepts and images were being validated by the findings of modern particle physics. The weird part was Raymond's ability to tap into the ancient images so clearly, just as he had been able to see and draw the millennia-old Shivite symbol of Nikhil's regression to his princely coronation. The truly weird part was probably the shocked look on my face as I realized what he was so accurately describing. At the conclusion of that Texas training, I had dictated some of my recollections. I found a snippet about one of Raymond's regressions, a cosmic conscious memory. I remembered that he had been part of a quilt consciousness overlooking the earth of the distant past or future. He was not alone in this quilt. He knew he was with other spiritual beings, and that they were all somehow interconnected. Raymond was neutral about this planet's capabilities for nurturing the growth of souls. Earth was black and icy, yet when he was sent down to determine the texture and nature of its covering, he discovered that it was not solid ice, but something softer, more flexible. And knowing that it did have the potential to sustain spiritual life, he and the entire consciousness were happy. He then basically went through the life cycle of evolution. First, he was a kind of one-celled being. As he became a tiny organism in the ocean, like a sea snail but smaller, he grew very excited. This organism extended its flagella, or protuberance, above the water level. This was an extremely important evolutionary step, which thrilled him and the overlying consciousness. It's not clear if this experience was the beginnings of evolution on Earth, or if it was in the distant future as a regeneration of this planet was occurring. Raymond sent in his own account of the experience, clarifying my initial impressions. As the regression began, I began flipping through eons of time and through great quantities of lives. This moved at a lightning-fast pace. It was the most similar to the films that used to be shown in high school, with frames that flashed by as the end of the film strip went click, click, click at rapid speed. The other comparison would be to a television back in the day, one on which you could adjust the vertical control, and the screen would roll quickly with a bar in between each scene. This is how my regression occurred. In my mind, I knew that each frame was a life, and that I was going backward. The film slowed and came to a stop in a primordial ocean with darkness and kelp-like vegetation that was rooted deep into the seafloor. I was a single-cell-type creature with a single hair-like appendage, and I was on the stalk of one of these kelp. I could note light above, and was working my way toward it. Upon reaching the surface of the water, I raised my flagella into the air, and in that moment I knew quite distinctly that what I had just done was new and very important for the future. I did not know specifically of what importance. However, it seemed to be tied to evolution, and there was a clear feeling of new life and development. I felt safe and quite independent, and I was unaware of any other life forms around me. Upon the end of the regression, I had no question that I had been in the oceanic soup before human life. I still do not know how to interpret this, but I knew that it was important at the time, and I hold it so now. Our bodies may be constrained by this physical dimension, but our minds and souls are not. In both his dream and his regression, Raymond allowed himself to venture beyond and above the earth. Doing so literally afforded him a universal perspective onto existence. The same was true for Marcia, the client featured in the following story. To heal her human life, she needed to uncover its decidedly non-human origins. Our souls are as vast and limitless as the stars. The missing piece. Marcia, an elegant and attractive South American woman in her late 40s, came into my office for her first session one dreary winter afternoon. Although she enjoyed children, Marcia had never wanted any of her own, and wondered if this had anything to do with a past life. She also often experienced indigestion. It didn't seem to impact her life in any major way, and she was already under a physician's care, but she was mildly curious whether this, too, could be traced back to earlier times. All seemed relatively well, and I felt confident that with hypnosis we could explore the straightforward issues with which she'd come to the session. We were ready to start when Marcia offhandedly mentioned a recurring dream she had had. In it, she was an otherworldly being from a beautiful planet with 3 suns. There was always someone she was leaving behind, someone who could not follow her. She could never see who it was, and she awoke each time with overwhelming sorrow. As Marcia spoke, she sat on the couch, looking not at me, but outside the window, far off into the distance. She was not depressed, not at all, but as she described the dream, an ancient, ineffable sadness seemed to be slowly unfolding within her, a paper-thin flower opening its leaves. There was a longing, a homesickness that was all the more confusing and poignant because she had no idea where this home even was. Marcia was successful. She enjoyed her life, and she had a very happy marriage with a husband whom she loved. Yet she felt that there was some kind of missing piece, some kind of missing piece. Was it a soulmate relationship that she was beginning to recognize? Its presence was starting to be revealed to her in dreamy fragments, but these were, as is often the case with dreamy fragments, so hazy and vague that they only left her feeling unfulfilled. I can't remember now if she spoke about not feeling exactly like she belonged here, or if that was just what was so obvious from her eyes, from the way she looked out the window at something so far beyond this office, this world. I regressed Marcia, and she easily went back into a lifetime that addressed her lack of desire to have children. It seemed to provide her with the answers she was seeking, and she was content enough, so we moved on. Immediately and without any prompting, Marcia moved ahead into another lifetime. In it, she was an otherworldly being from a beautiful planet with 3 suns. I asked her to look down at her body, but she quickly corrected me. Bodies are not important. Her people were visited by a group of tremendously wise, ancient beings from another land, one that was completely devoted to healing and whose origins they could project with their eyes. Marcia clung to them, absorbing their wisdom and knowledge as they taught her how to heal others using metals. "They are so much higher than us. We're peasants compared to them," she explained, referring to the visitors' depth of intelligence as well as love. They were, as she put it, working on what is going to become the human body. Marcia, drowning in the profound love and spirituality in these beings' eyes, thought about leaving her planet and becoming human. "My people are the last of a long, long line, and we are the only group of beings that can transition into humans," she said. "The others are creators." Marcia trusted them so fully, and she was always up for an adventure, but she loved her home very much, and she knew, without being aware of any details, that the missing piece from her dream was a part of her life there. She was thrilled to feel its presence around her again, and to realize that they were, at that moment, not yet separated. This was something she could never leave behind. At once Marcia became dejected. A warlike people had invaded her planet, imprisoning people's essences inside statues and idols, and causing terrible destruction as they seized control. With resignation, and because she now possessed knowledge of healing, she said, "Now I have to go to Earth. I need to help." She mourned how Earth, the project of those exquisite healers with eyes full of bottomless love, had not turned out the way it was supposed to. "It wasn't going to be like this. It is very, very different than what I had expected it to be," she said. I asked Marcia again about the entity that was visiting her in her dreams. This time there was no hesitation. "We are 2 of 1. You can choose either to be a whole one or to be 2 of 1. This is chosen just for the experience, not in the human sense, but more like a mirror, something so that you can see the face of you. It is part of me, yet it is separate from me." She sighed. "It was the stronger part. I was more like the dreamer." Interesting, I thought. Throughout light years and lifetimes, ever the dreamer. Marcia's voice was thick with regret. "I came to Earth on an impulse decision, just to help, and now I'm stuck, and I'm forever separated from this peace, my peace. It could not follow her to earth. She could not return to it. The grief over any separation is intense, but an eternal one seemed unbearable. I was used to working with clients who had lost loved ones to illness or death, divorce or distance. As difficult as those events were, we could work with them. But I was at a loss for what Marcia was experiencing, the endless separation from one's self. I pictured her sitting in my office only an hour earlier, staring out the window. Now it was painfully clear what she had been searching for. I pressed her for details about the piece. Was there anything she could do in this life that could help her to reconnect with it, or to cope with the separation? "Just keep the memories," she said dully, clearly not believing this herself. Even though Marcia desperately wanted a better sense of what this other part was, it eluded her. Not only was she unable to see it, without it, according to her description, Marcia would never be able to see herself, the very face of her. I hated to end the session on such a palpably sad note. So I led Marcia into one of my father's healing visualizations, in which she visited a temple with crystals. I thought that it could help clear up the emotions generated by her regression, as well as give her insight into her indigestion issue, which she had requested. This meditation doesn't require the client to speak, so I instructed Marcia to take a few deep breaths and listen to my voice. Her face and body visibly relaxed. There is a point in that meditation in which a wise teacher or guide joins the client, who then visualizes a large movie screen appearing that can help illuminate some of the sources of her physical condition. I paused here for a few minutes so that Marcia could spend time watching the screen, and although she was silent, she was clearly in a deep state, engaging in the visualization. I sat back in my chair, finally taking a few deep breaths myself. It had been a long, exhausting day. Then, suddenly and without warning, Marcia's entire being exploded into joy. Tears were streaming down her face, but she was laughing. I bolted upright in the chair. What had happened? Reluctant to interrupt such an obviously emotional experience, I waited for her feelings to die down, but they seemed only to intensify. "What are you experiencing?" I finally asked. It felt as though I weren't speaking to a client, but to a glowing ball of energy. It took a moment before Marcia could translate whatever she was feeling into ordinary, earthbound words. "My guide," she said. "He's going to show me, on the movie screen." "Show you the origins of your indigestion symptoms?" I asked, not understanding why this would spark such a strong reaction in her, but more than happy to go along with whatever was happening. No. Marcia was almost literally jumping for joy as she sat up in the recliner. It was as if a completely different person were sitting there in front of me. She had come into my office somewhat quiet, yet content. She had plumbed the depths of existential grief and sorrow as she explored what it meant to become human. But now she was radiating waves of bliss, her arms spontaneously lifting themselves up in front of her, giving the impression that she was floating. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before. Happiness, transcendent and pure, bursting inside and through her. She looked like a child with her excitement for what she knew was about to happen next, but at the same time she seemed beyond physical form, neither adult nor child, but simply soul, lovely and huge and dreamed up in delight by the beautiful-eyed being she cared for so dearly. Marcia held her hands up to her heart, as if it were too big, too deep, too boundless in this moment to be contained inside a mere human body, this tiny temporary shell. "He's going to let me see, just this one time, my entire self. He's going to show me," she whispered, "the missing piece." I did not say another word. It was difficult not to ask Marcia questions about what she was discovering, but I recognized that doing so would have only satisfied my intellectual curiosity, while interrupting her blissful reunion. For healing to occur, she did not need to describe to me what was happening. She only needed to be there, to experience it. Many years ago on another planet, Marcia had lost her peace. That very day on this planet, she had found her peace, and that was all that mattered. Amy Weiss. Existence is so much more amazing and miraculous than we can begin to know. New universes are bubbling up into creation all the time. Energies and forces exist far beyond our comprehension. It is as if we are trying to hear a dog whistle, but the sound vibrations speed away silently outside our aural range. And then there are the non-physical realms, too, beyond number, stretching to infinity. Our souls can plumb these realms. We have lived on the world of three suns, and we have been the wise ones also. But we have forgotten our origins. How to fathom timelessness, eternity? Our souls know. We all have a missing piece. It is waiting for us at the end of our spiritual journey. It is at home. Death is often described as passing through a doorway into another dimension, a higher one with many levels that is brighter, greater, and much more vibrant. Consciousness becomes expanded and multisensory. It is akin to graduating from the limitations of the old black-and-white television to the three-dimensional high-definition colors of modern ones. But reincarnation is not limited to the earth. Souls attend schools throughout all the universes. It appears that souls in every universe and every dimension are the same. Souls are souls. Physical bodies, however, vary tremendously despite the similarity of the souls within. After death, when all souls enter those higher multi-level states, they are drawn to the plane or vibration of most comfort to them. It is there where we come together once again. Advanced learning takes place. Reincarnational planning is begun. It is also there where Marcia could possibly meet once more with the entity from her dream. Even if karmic gravity pulls them once again to different worlds when it is time for them to reincarnate, this separation will only be temporary. When liberated eventually from the cycle of rebirths, they will never again be separated, never pulled apart by the forces of incarnation. Of course, since fundamentally all is one and everything is connected, separation is only an illusion. All souls come from the one indescribable source. But our illusion is very ancient and very strong, so if our reunion with our closest soulmate, our other half, is temporarily delayed, it is good to know it will be inevitable and eternal. Can those beings in the higher states appear to us while we are in physical form? The next two stories suggest that they can, and do. Roadside assistance. The discoveries that you have made, which I have read about in your books and learned about in your Chicago workshop one recent summer, are helping to alleviate my fear of driving in cars. I'm a terrible passenger. I'm a better driver because then I'm in control and can take precautions that some people think are excessive. In fairness to myself, I once was hit by a semi-truck on the expressway going 80 miles an hour. Miraculously, I was not hurt. My car was totaled. I didn't get a scratch. I'm quite certain that something held me in my seat. I remember, a fraction of a second after I put my head down and said aloud, "This is bad," seeing my body shake back and forth and wondering how I was staying in my seat. And then it was over, and I was fine. I was on the other side of the expressway in oncoming traffic when my car finally stopped spinning and came to a halt. A man ran up to my window and said, "Put it in neutral," which I did. He pushed me to the emergency lane, and a moment later cars came rushing by me on the expressway. And then he disappeared. No car drove away. No one was walking anywhere near me. He was just gone. Reading your books has allowed me to view that incident differently. With less fear, absolutely. Knowing that I have a lesson to fulfill in this lifetime has helped me to accept more of the why in my life. Robin. Robin's story reminds me of many others, including the one by Asia that directly follows it, where in conditions of extreme danger an angel or divine figure appears and moves the person to a place of safety. I'm not sure if Robin's angel was a heaven-sent being or simply an ordinary person coming forth to aid another in distress. Is there really any difference between the two? The real moment of impact for Robin and Asia occurred not when their vehicles collided, but when they came face to face with an essential spiritual truth. We are always protected, always cared for, and always safe from harm. It does not have to take a crisis to realize this. Sometimes it only takes a story. Guided back to love. Growing up in a conservative Christian family meant that beliefs that were different from my parents were routinely abhorred, detested. Even a mere thought that might deviate from the family norm created a palpable fear inside me. As the youngest and only girl in my family, I knew and experienced things that were way outside my parents' Christian mindset. At the age of 3, I delighted in communicating with angels, animals, and spirit guides. Widening the split between my spiritual world and my parents' Christian heritage was my strong impression of past lives. Early on, I would look at people and see their faces change, sometimes so much that it took me a while to recognize them. I did not understand this strange phenomenon at the time and thought it might be bad or ungodly because no one else seemed to experience it. Maybe there was something wrong with me. Afraid of being flawed, I fiercely desired to know the truth, but I would not get any answers until many years later during a near-fatal car accident. In the winter of 1987, a semi-trailer crashed into my van, trapping my 23-year-old body inside. Searing flames breathed down on me. Panicked, I tried each door, only to find them bent and ungiving. I was choking and on the verge of fainting when my guardian angel appeared. Brown, wavy hair encircled his face, and his skin was as soft and smooth as the maroon, gray, and blue robes that flowed around him. Miraculously, he guided me out of a partially open window and through the flames. I survived, barely. With 72% of my body burned, along with multiple complications, I was placed on the ICU's most critical list for 2 months. Each exhalation could have been my last. Suddenly the alarm on my respirator blared as swarms of nurses and doctors ran to my aid. "Code Blue!" they yelled in a frenzy. I was dying. My spiritual body floated out and crossed through a doorway into an expansive starlit sky. There, a woman and 2 men who called themselves Ascended Masters greeted me. Dressed in comfortable, neutral-toned linens, they emitted wisdom and kindness. They said that they knew all about me, and as representatives of God, were here to teach me about my life and to guide me back to love. Your spiritually connected childhood has been forgotten, and your adult years have so far been marked by fear, said the elder male Ascended Master. I nodded. We have teachings for you about regaining that oneness. We will show you your other lifetimes to assist you. When you say other lifetimes, do you mean past lives? I was raised in the Christian faith, I stammered. My minister professed that there is only one life, and then heaven or hell. That's not true. Throwing my hands up to my mouth, I smiled as a profound understanding began to settle in. Is that why I saw people's faces change, and sometimes entire scenes play out around them? Were those scenes their past lives? Yes, the female responded. I didn't make that up. I let out a huge sigh. Nothing is wrong with me, and I'm not crazy. At that moment I looked down, unconcerned, at my burned body, lifeless on the hospital bed. The doctors and nurses continued their attempts to revive me. Only a few minutes had passed, but it felt like hours. I focused my attention back on the masters. "It's time to start our lessons," said the ascended masters. "In a moment you will see and feel how similar lives, one lived in fear and one lived in love, profoundly influenced you and those with whom you had contact. This experience will guide you out of fear and toward the deliberate choosing of love, thus transforming your life." The master raised his arm in an arch, and several holographic screens enclosed me. "Are you ready to see your other lives?" he asked. A man appeared on the screen, jerking around sacks of grain in a mammoth underground vault. As he counted the bags, his long robe dragged on the dirt floor. He pursed his lips while marking the number of sacks. "Not enough to go around," he said, shaking his head and pounding his fist on the nearby table. A moment later the door opened and a young woman with her hair wrapped in fabric collapsed at his feet. She squeezed her hands together and pleaded, "My family is starving. Please help us. You are our last hope." She raised her clasped hands high in the air as she wept, and her eyes intently searched his face for a human response. "I have nothing for you. Leave." The man stood up and flipped his robe behind him. The hard edge of the fabric whacked the floor, sending a fine swirl of dust onto her face. "No, you don't understand. We will die without your grain," the woman begged. She grabbed the bottom of his vestment. "Get out!" He pushed her off of him and into the wall. She stumbled out the door toward her waiting family. Her child ran to her and threw his arms around her waist, but she knocked him to the ground, sobbing and yelling at him to stop. The screens lifted. Spinning around with outrage, I said, "What a horrible man! How could he have treated me like that?" The three of them scanned me with a gentle smile and replied, "You were the man." The intense sensation of a burning steel rod pierced my stomach. I tried to swallow. Well, there wasn't any food for her. I must have needed the grain for someone else, or to replant the crops for next year's harvest, or—" Defensively, I babbled on until I screamed, "I had to say no." With kindness, they said, "It's not that you said no, but that you said it with a closed heart." "Oh." My shoulders slumped. "I don't think I know how to say no in a loving manner." "Actually, you do. We will watch a similar scene from another life where you said no, yet remained in a loving heart." I shivered and turned back to the screens, where I saw another young woman, this one with hair to her waist. As she stepped into the room where a man sat with sacks of grain, she cried, "My family is without food. I beg you for help." Buckling at the man's feet, she reached both of her hands up toward his face. He bent down and cupped his hands around hers. "No, I am sorry," he said. His voice was firm but soft. "There is no grain to give to you or your family." Gently he helped her up and to the door. Once she was outside, her young child ran to her, and she embraced him. The screens moved away, and I said, "It is possible to say no with an open heart." Circumstances outside you do not have to lead your heart. Instead, allow your heart to lead in all circumstances. "I see that when I lived as the fearful man, I created a wave of fear in the woman, which then went to her family. Instead, when I gave love to the other woman, she gave love to her family." Exactly. We are all connected. The well-being of the individual is woven into the well-being of all things. Whether we give love or fear, everyone and everything is affected. They added, "We would also like you to share with others what you've learned here. They don't need to have a near-death or death experience to receive spiritual life healing. It is available to everyone who desires and asks for it. With direction Anyone can learn to see and feel their own past lives and learn from them. The Ascended Masters told me that they would be back to teach me more, but for now it was time to return to my body. The doctors revived me. I felt heaviness and pain, as if I were wearing a wetsuit that was filled with boiling water, trapping my frail body inside. As the weeks passed, the Ascended Masters continued to visit and guide me. They helped me find the perseverance to make a complete recovery. These spiritual teachings became an anchor in my life. The Masters showed me how all of us are able to unite with the divine and heal what feels broken. We don't need a near-death experience to have our truth revealed to us. All we need is to find a way to release our fears and open our hearts. For me, it took a dramatically close wake-up call. For you, perhaps these shared words of the Masters are enough. Asia Voigt. Many people who have had near-death experiences become more intuitive, have psychic dreams, and often lose their fear of what happens after death. They know. The overwhelming majority of us will not have a near-death experience, but we can learn the same lessons nevertheless, as Asia points out. We can do this through meditation, through practices of spiritual contemplation, and through past life regression. The methods may be slower or different, but the results are the same. We see and feel the interconnectedness of all beings and of all things. We understand the need to give and to receive love, and in the process of doing so, we let go of doubt and fear. In realizing our true nature as eternal beings, we can reduce or even eliminate our fear of death and dying. Among the beautiful and wise thoughts and teachings in Asia's story, one quote from her Masters instantly grabbed my attention. Circumstances outside you do not have to lead your heart. Instead, allow your heart to lead in all circumstances. How true this is. More than 1,300 years ago, the Chinese philosopher Huineng wrote, "When we are free from attachment to all outer objects, the mind will be in peace. Our essence of mind is intrinsically pure, and the reason why we are perturbed is because we allow ourselves to be carried away by the circumstances we are in. He who is able to keep his mind unperturbed, irrespective of circumstances, has attained enlightenment." Our hearts and minds can transform all outer circumstances, bringing love and peace even in the most difficult of times. Fear eats at our stomach, our immune system, our health. It constricts our heart. But fear is sustained by our dependency on outer things, people, and situations. If we are content with the inner state of loving kindness and serenity, which is independent and self-sufficient and not buffeted by the vicissitudes of other people's opinions and behaviors, or the false security of our possessions, then we will be at peace. Like Asia's story, Michael's, which follows, sheds light on the near-death and after-death experience. His visions and emotions after leaving his physical body in his past life are consistent with so many other accounts of this nature. They tell of a magnificent recognition of oneself as a spiritual being on a journey that lasts much longer than the human body. Deep within the horrors of a long-ago war, Michael discovered his own pure essence. He discovered peace. Nights of Light. As a past life regressionist and spiritual counselor for the last 7 years, and a crisis counselor, diagnostician, and psychotherapist for the last 20, I have taken hundreds of people back to their past lives. Many of the sessions have been profoundly moving and healing. But my favorite of all was one in which I was the client and the facilitator was Dr. Brian Weiss. I had not asked for the experience, and it was completely unexpected when Brian offered. A wonderful surprise. The fact that it was to be on stage, under the lights, and in front of so many people was a bit daunting, but there was no way I was going to pass it up. Brian and I had spoken a number of times, privately, mostly about our work. I don't talk about it much, but he was aware that I was living with chronic pain in my back. I had regressed many people by then, but had never been regressed myself. I felt both excited and concerned. I knew that I was almost as left-brained and empirically based in my thinking as Brian. That fact and the chronic pain I experienced constantly made it seem unlikely that I would be readily induced into trance. Moreover, I knew every word of Brian's induction. I knew where he was going to try to take me, and exactly how, with what words. As I stepped up on the stage, I whispered to Brian, away from the microphones, "Please don't get discouraged if you can't take me there. If this doesn't work, it will be my fault, not yours." Brian looked into my eyes and said, "Let's see what happens," as calmly as if he were saying, "Isn't it a beautiful day?" He made no attempt to perform anything remotely like a standard induction. He simply began talking to me, as if we were sitting together on a park bench. I remember thinking, when is he going to hypnotize me? The words he said were not at all what I expected. "Tell me a few things about your childhood. What was that like?" he asked. Sitting next to him on the stage with my eyes gently closed, a wonderful early memory did come to me, one I had completely forgotten. Merely by talking, Brian was able to transport me to a beautiful memory, with inordinate clarity, from my childhood. As he took me to a past life, I became conscious of how incredibly quiet it had gotten in the room. I began to feel an enormous wave of heat flowing toward me from the silent audience. There was an intense feeling of prayer and goodwill in the room, as I began searching in all directions, with my eyes closed, for an image to appear. An air of expectancy seemed to be building. Seconds turned into minutes as I searched for an image, and I could actually feel the crowd right there with me, willing me into an experience, group praying that the images would come. Just as I was about to say, "I'm sorry, Brian, but I see nothing," I saw the dirty face of a young boy, perhaps 12 to 14 years old. I immediately knew somehow, that I was the young boy. I was standing just a few feet inside the shade of a forest, talking to a knight who was in the forest with me. I was putting a bridle and a saddle on the knight's horse. The knight's armor was laid out all around on the ground next to me. Next to the armor, I saw a curious little set of steps, just 3 steps, with a halter attached to them at the back. These steps could be put on one's back, like a backpack. The heat from the crowd had grown increasingly intense, and the quiet in the room was deafening. "It is the Middle Ages," I finally said, and a huge group sigh of relief rose up from the audience in front of me. They had all been attempting to assist Brian and me with their focus, their own healing intentions and prayers, and now they realized I had made it there. I could see myself very clearly in a life long, long ago. "I am a young page," I explained. "I am wearing crude sandals made of rope with leather on the bottoms. My hair is straight, dark brown, and looks as if someone put a bowl over my head and cut around it. My face is dirty, and I am wearing what looks like a burlap potato sack, with holes cut in it for my arms and legs. I have a rope belt tied around my sack dress at the waist. Just outside the forest, to the left, is a huge open field, and men are assembling there. There are knights on horseback, and many more are walking, with various weapons and shields. Some simply had large axes and crude clubs and maces. Others had swords and knives with them. Still others had longbows and crossbows. All were coming together, mingling and talking, there in the field. Thousands were arriving from every direction. On the hill to our right was a large, beautiful castle with tall turrets. I was now finished putting the bridle and saddle on the horse, and I was standing on the top step, putting chainmail down over the knight's upper body. There were tears welling in my eyes as I heard myself begin to speak. They say you will not return, that you're going to die." "Who said that?" he asked. "Everyone. They say that the army you go to fight is 10 times the size of ours, and that you and most of the others will die." The knight looked directly into my eyes as he said, "Do not fear, for dying is easy. It is living that is hard. To die valiantly on the field of battle with my friends is an honor, and it is a destiny we all know awaits us. I am not afraid, because I know that our souls live on and go up to heaven when our body dies. We never truly die." By this time I was crying silently as I began to slide his armor over his head. Tears were running down my cheeks. "Don't go. You don't have to go," I whispered. Still crying, I began placing his helmet down over his face and head. I positioned the steps next to his horse, and he slowly and carefully walked up them. Swinging his leg over the side of the saddle, he said, "Remember what I have said here today. If I do not return, we will meet again in heaven." With that, he turned his horse toward the quickly filling field of men and rode out of the darkness of the forest toward them. Brian moved me ahead in time, and I saw 4 men walking into the castle courtyard, carrying a knight. He was lying on his back, on his shield. I did not want to believe it was he, but I knew that it was. I began running, chasing them into the castle, and arrived as the knight was being placed on the ground. They removed his helmet, and the men began feeling around his waist belt and retrieved a small leather pouch. Opening it, they pulled out a small note on a crude piece of paper. What they read aloud from the note instantly made me both happy and sad. "To he who finds this note, it is my last wish that my horse, my sword and armor, all of my personal property, and my station in this life go to my page." Of course, that was I. I was distraught that I would not see him again in that life. I appreciated all that he had done for me, but I also began to realize, then and there, that I might be looking down at and realizing my own future. Yes, knights fight and knights die, I thought. I was crying openly as the man handed me his sword and began stripping the armor from his body and handing it to me. There was no sensation of celebration. I had lost my dear friend and was being filled with a sense of duty, a duty that I had doubts I could perform. Moving forward in time to see more of my life as the page, I found myself in the castle courtyard, now taller and a little older. I wore a simple long shirt with no armor at all. I was fighting with a man much larger and stronger than I, with big wooden swords. I was attempting to block his unrelenting blows, but failing miserably. Every 3 or 4 blows, the man would strike or plunge the dull wooden sword into my body. Each time he did, I heard him shout, "Dead! You're dead!" It was a lesson in humiliation, humility, and patience. It seemed effortless for him to continue killing me over and over with different swipes and blows to my body. The images began rapidly shifting, and I grew taller and more broad-shouldered in each, as other men continued to train me to fight. Fear, trepidation, and anxiety tugged at me each time I died, there in the courtyard, as I sensed that one day before long my adversary would not be my friend, and the swords would not be made out of wood. Brian smoothly took me forward in time again, and I was now fully grown, standing in chainmail, a handsome man in my early 20s. The armor now fit perfectly. I stood inside the courtyard of the castle, and a page stood in front of me on the set of steps, sliding my armor over my head and upper body. With tears in his eyes, he begged me not to go, just as I had done so with the knight when I was a page, and I repeated the very same words to him that I had heard so long ago. Soon I saw myself on a large, broad, open plain. The land was flat and dusty. I was in the thick of a massive battle. I was on my horse, and there in front of me on his own horse was a huge, powerful knight, much larger than I. He was clearly very experienced, as he was raining relentless blows down upon me with a massive, heavy sword. The fighting was extremely loud now, close and intense, and I could hear men swearing, groaning, yelling, and screaming. The battle seemed to be coming from everywhere, from all sides, the clanging of metal against metal, the frightened cries of horses and men, the dust continuing to rise. I was growing weaker each time I fended off another blow from this man's sword. Just then, on my left, I saw a tall man coming up from behind me on foot. I had enough time to notice him in my peripheral vision as he lifted a sword to strike me. With one swift slashing motion, I swung my sword down toward him. It cleaved his left shoulder and arm completely off, and he fell back to the ground. At that moment, I saw an amazing thing. The man whose entire left shoulder I had severed was wobbling to his feet and coming up behind me. With the last bit of energy he could summon, his right hand laid his blade flat, down onto the back of my saddle, with the tip against the center of my spine, under the back curvature of my armor. He leaned all his weight against the tip, and I felt a burning sensation as his sword entered my body. Helpless, I began to convulsively twitch and shake as I watched the entire blade emerge from my lower belly. Mortally wounded, I found myself lying in the dust, the sword sticking out of my lower abdomen. There, only a few feet away from me, lying on his side, was the man I had just killed, the man who had just killed me. The sheer madness of war could be heard all around us. The screams of the swords, the horses snorting and rearing up in pain and terror, the wounded men scattered all over the ground. Many were calling out, calling for their mothers and wives, swearing, screaming, crying. "Please kill me! Please kill me, I beg of you!" Curiously, I could feel no pain and no fear, only a warm calm coming over my entire body. Perhaps I was in shock. I looked over at the man who was dying on the ground just in front of me. He was silent, staring at me as I stared at him. The two of us exchanged these last gazes silently, looking into one another's eyes, blinking in the dust, knowing that each would be the last person we ever saw in this life. And then I became aware of a subtle stirring inside me, and I felt a very odd but pleasant sensation. I had closed my eyes, and I was gliding, floating out and above myself, feeling completely weightless. I gazed down at myself, not at the body lying on the ground, but at the thing that rose from it, which could somehow look down and see the former me, my shell. I was an intensely bright white light, so powerfully strong that it was difficult to behold. I was only about 5 feet above myself, and I glanced over to where my adversary had been lying. He, too, had become a luminous white cone, hovering just above his own body. With joy, I explained to Brian that my adversary and I were now 2 cones. "Cones?" he repeated. "Yes, we look like cone-shaped white lights." Both of us began to rise slowly over the field, and I could see that thousands of men were still fighting and that the battle had stretched nearly a half-mile in every direction. As we went up a bit higher, I began to witness something deeply moving and truly incredible. All around and through the battlefield, I could see countless brilliant cones of light slowly rising upward, rising from the dust in every area of the battle. We were all ascending, becoming farther and farther from the conflict below, our souls weaving into the air in an indescribably beautiful movement. It was such a stunning contrast from the horror and chaos of the war beneath us. "Are there any lights that are bigger or brighter than the others?" Brian asked. "No, we look exactly the same." "Any lights going down?" he wondered aloud. I could feel his fascination, his keen interest in what I was seeing. "No, we are all the same, and we are all going up," I responded. "There is what looks like a giant funnel that is formed in the center of a very large cloud, and we are all floating toward its center. I feel wonderful, as if I am swimming in an ocean of love. I have never felt so wonderful. No pain at all. I feel better than I ever did in my body, completely untethered from it, free of it. No pain, no worry, only great peace and bliss. How many other lights are ascending with you? Hundreds, I whispered. There are hundreds of cones above us, and hundreds more coming in from below. I felt us all begin to float into the funnel, and I described what this was like. The funnel's end is large, but there is a narrower, more luminous tunnel attached to it as you enter, filled with an extremely strong white light. There are about 30 cones crowded in there with me, and we are all the same light as the tunnel. I was in absolute awe. I was later shown a photo of that moment, taken by someone in the audience. I was looking straight up, above me, my head rocked back, and my expression was just that, one of complete, revelatory awe. We've come to a great room. It is incredibly bright white in here as well, the whole room, but this room seems limitless. It has no walls. So many beautiful white cones are floating, hovering all around. There is great peace here, as well as the sensation that enormous, limitless love surrounds us. 2 brilliantly lit, very wise-looking old men with white robes and long beards have come for someone. They are leaving with a group of about 30 cones, getting smaller and smaller as they disappear to the right. I wonder where we go from here. Do they come for you? Brian asked. Not yet, but I am calm and patient. There are so very many of us. It is so peaceful here, and I know that they will come for me when it is my time, I replied. As we waited, Brian asked, What do you think you learned from that life? That war and killing are madness, that no one wins, and all on both sides lose. Every time a man on either side falls on the battlefield, misery befalls their families and their loved ones, who grieve very deeply. The men who die need not be grieved for. They are experiencing pure love and bliss as they are welcomed back to the resting place. But the grief, pain, and depth of the sorrow it causes their loved ones and so many others is incalculable. Every time one man falls, someone at home loses a son, a brother, a husband, a father, an uncle, a nephew, a friend. Their grief and pain run deep, and the hole that is left in their lives is never filled until we meet again in heaven. Then we can lay down this burden of grief that we felt would never fully abate, and we can see and embrace our loved ones who have gone before us in the peace and serenity of the resting place. Love is the constant, most important thread that runs through the tapestry of all of our lives. It is what makes living so very sacred and special. To share our love and be loved, nothing else is remotely as important. I opened my eyes as I was brought out of the trance and looked out at the audience. Many of them were crying and smiling at the same time. Those, I thought, are tears of joy. They were happy and thankful for what they had just witnessed, as was I. I had never anticipated that such a joy and blessing would come my way. Brian asked if the area in my back where I was stabbed is the area where I experienced the most back pain. I replied that it was the exact same place. Since that day in the summer of 2009, I have had a noticeable reduction in the pain. Approximately 1/3 of it is completely gone, and I now have hope that even more of it will recede in the fullness of time. Clearly seeing and experiencing your life and death from over 500 years ago is a truly amazing experience. You are changed. Your eyes are then fully opened to the truth of what we are. We go through a universal metamorphosis, over and over again, until we learn our lessons here on earth. When we die, the caterpillar becomes the butterfly, and we float up and out of our body and straight back to our loved ones and our rightful resting place in heaven. Michael Brown. Michael's description of the funnel into which the knight's souls entered, the tunnel connected to it, and the clustering of the hundreds and hundreds of light cones is so wonderfully reminiscent of Raymond's imagery in the first story of this chapter. We would approach a vortex-type opening shaped like a funnel. Once we passed through the long tube into the universe, we would join with others in what appeared to be a blanket made up of millions of us. And, of course, Raymond's description itself is wonderfully reminiscent of a concept that has existed since the 2nd century. Voices from across the globe and across the ages speak to us again and again of the spiritual immortality that belies our physical mortality. We are the light, not its shadows. To picture this, think of the sun. We are as powerful and resplendent as that glorious star. Here, in physical bodies, we have forgotten that we are the light, the sun, instead believing that we are only its reflection, the shadows that it casts. We are exquisite beings of pure and brilliant light, swimming in a sea of bliss. The recognition that we are light is, literally, enlightenment. When we leave the body, everything is clear. We are bathed in a state of absolute and constant peace, no longer afflicted by the temporary emotions of fear and despair. There is no pain, only a sense of well-being. And when the glowing and wise old men with the white robes and long beards come to take us home and joyously reunite us with our loved ones, we will finally be completely healed. We will be whole again. This peace does not need to be something we obtain only when we rise from our bodies and leave the earth behind. The earth needs it too. Peace must be found within ourselves and throughout the world, not only at the individual level, but also at the international one. What if we finally decided to stop engaging in wars? What if our countries cooperated instead of competed? And what if, as this next story by Bethany suggests, our political structures and systems were to be founded on and motivated by love instead of power? There is nothing more powerful than love. Global Karma. During a meditation at your July 2010 course, I channeled a little note about world leaders and group karma. There is a separate plane in the spirit world for governments, where great minds can enter and negotiate with world leaders who have passed away. They can change the things on the ground for good, but they are only allowed to change what is from the heart. They can negotiate and whisper in the ear of their ancestors, and they love this. In such a way, they can create the most magnificent change in thinking. They can converse and work for a peaceful outcome, which isn't based on power, but on love, balance, and making things right. The world leaders all have their guides, but they don't often listen to them. Yet this is changing for the better. If these leaders started doing regressions, it would help and then filter down to create a massive change, releasing a lot of energy and karma and healing on a huge scale. This is true even for dictators considered to be cruel and brutal. If they started regressing, healing, and raising their vibration, then the whole situation that they created would be released. All the leaders are in a little pocket joined together by group karma, and as soon as one begins, they will be released into a higher vibration here on the ground as well as in the spirit world. Therefore, the trouble that was their energy will be released peacefully and without any further ego. If people were trained to do hypnotism and regression as part of a treatment for terrorists, it would create a shift on a massive scale. It would prevent future situations from happening. They can regress them to get to the karmic root cause and then heal it. This can even be done to the people who work for them, so that healing can occur up the line. Even the leaders considered to be evil have had many spirit helpers who were trying to release healing energy. This would have been their other path in life had they not chosen the paths they did. Bethany. Of course, politicians and world leaders are spiritual beings. We all are. We have the same spiritual helpers and advisors as they do, whether guides, masters, angels, wise beings, or whatever we want to name these emanations of the divine. Many governmental officials, however, are close-minded about the spiritual realm. Ego and pride prevent them from opening up to the possibilities. Unbeknownst to Bethany, I have been working for many years with politicians and leaders from all over the planet. We work confidentially. Progress is slow, but it is steady. There is hope. This development is not limited to the political sphere. It encompasses many other traditionally left-brained and logical professions, too. In the next story, an attorney relates her own account of overcoming her doubts and awakening to her higher nature. When we are open, she writes, there is always a way for the universe to show its truth. Let her words be a way. Cloud consciousness. We are all spiritual beings living in human forms. Under hypnosis, we are able to tap into our inner selves and to know our true nature better. One may question the validity of images, past lives, or future lives that are revealed. At first, I also had doubts. Nevertheless, when we are open, there is always a way for the universe to show its truth. This is a step in my own process of awakening, which has transformed my life. Dr. Brian Weiss's hypnosis program has not only benefited individuals in their healing, but has also opened up a deep ocean of knowledge about the universe, which is beneficial to human evolution at large. My own hypnotherapy subjects have taught me about the coexistence of multiple dimensions, how our thoughts create and affect realities, the law of karma, the possibility of change, and the interrelatedness of all beings and events. As St. Augustine said, miracles are not contrary to nature, but only contrary to what we know about nature. Before I learned hypnosis from Dr. Weiss at Omega Institute in 2005, I had an unbelievable experience in Hong Kong. Out of curiosity, I had my first hypnosis session with a psychic called Jackie, who was recommended by my friend in April 2005. While I was expecting to experience some past lives, to my surprise, I witnessed and felt myself as part of the clouds with consciousness. I was without any gender, but in a white, transparent form. When Jackie asked who I was, I answered calmly, "I am a goddess." She asked me what I was doing, and I replied, "I am flying amongst the mountains, making sure that the plants have sunlight and rain." "How do you know that you are a goddess?" "I am elevated in the air, and I see tiny people from the ground asking for my help. Some are bowing to me, and some are simply praying. But I can only motivate other people to help them. I cannot do it directly, for it will scare them." As a lawyer, I have never thought of saying or experiencing something like this, and so my logical mind thought it must have been just a dream. Jackie told me that it was not, but rather that it was an example of Davic consciousness. "What is Davic consciousness?" I asked. She radiated a beautiful smile, looked at the top of my head, and hugged me. "Of the angels. I see many angels over your head." I later browsed the internet for the term. One article that resonated with me said that our evolution may be in biological form like animals, in Davic form like natural forces, the winds, the clouds, and the rain, and from other stars, souls with higher wisdom from other planets. These evolutions are interchangeable. With what I learned from Dr. Weiss, I became aware of my true self and my abilities, and I've used these skills to help others awaken, know their life purpose, heal themselves through understanding the law of karma, and, above all, raise the consciousness of many people. All these are beneficial to mankind. In one regression that I conducted, a woman called May described being in a forest, being back home. She felt incredibly happy there. I asked her what she saw. Many transparent white beings. Millions. They are smaller than a rose. They have transparent wings. Are you one of them? Yes, she whispered. I've no sex. I'm neutral. My name is Arono. Do you belong to a particular tree or plant? No. We work together as a group. When we see that a tree needs energies, we give energies to it collectively. We protect nature. I asked her if she had any messages to relay. She replied, We are of a higher vibration that gives energies to the trees and plants. We form a supportive network of energies to merge with the vibration of the earth. In this network there is no competition, only cooperation and happiness. We work together. We communicate through telepathy. We are all transparent. There is no hiding, no cheating, only honesty and peace. Our energies are pure. Are you different from the clouds? I could be clouds, she said. It is just a thought form. I asked May if she knew anything about the year 2012. She responded, About that time there is a change on Earth. Climate change, energy change, wind, rain. We need to cooperate. Humans need to cooperate with us. I questioned what could be done. Learn to look at your inner self, she said. Look at your heart. Keep aware and change. There is no law and written contract. You can manifest. 10 to 20 years ago, many masters came to Earth to help. They are higher beings. Most of the babies these days are higher beings. They are happy and content, and many of them are psychics. Parents have to learn from their babies. They have special vibrations never known on this earth, and they've come to help. The parents live in a competitive world, but these babies are non-competitive. They can feel the inner heart of adults. They've come to awake our inner ability. She added, I remember that my mission is to deliver a message from the source. I brought her toward the source, and then asked her to describe it. Golden light, she said. It is a sense of being. I can't see the vibration. It can be big, it can be small. Being can happen without a physical body. The source is where all the universes come from. It is just knowing, a consciousness, expanding energies. In human language, it means light in a space. But there is no dimension. It only exists. What messages does it have for you? When we change, the world will change. We don't need to work so hard. In 100 years' time, humans will not need any devices. Not many people can align with energies from the source. I can hold the original vibration, absorb it, carry it, and affect humans with it. My vibrations will affect the vibrations of my surroundings. People come to you because they are attracted to your energies. They are just like clouds. We are like a tree. People come and rest under our shadow, and they go. Just give them energies. When we need energies, absorb it from the source and give it to the rest of the world. This is what receiving and giving means. The energies from the source are abundant. I am the source and part of it. It is expanding, and so am I. Assist others. When we are confused, go to the source, restore, and feel the energies. Feel stronger. Help others to find their true self, because not everyone can align with the source. Be patient with humans. Bitterness is normal. We have to learn the emotions of being human, but we should not allow ourselves to be trapped by these emotions, for we are just here to learn. You choose your partner just to experience love. Learn about human relationship and vibrations. It is all part of the learning process. One morning, I had a whim to browse through a book by Sri Aurobindo, an Indian yogi and saint. In one chapter, he mentioned that all natural forces are personal. In other words, all natural forces have consciousness. If we recognize them as fellow conscious beings, just as we ourselves are, we can communicate with them. The scientists cannot control weather because they treat it as simply a dead object. The shamans and people who understand nature relate to it in a different way. They personify the forces, regarding them as friends, and these consciousnesses respond favorably. In fact, many children personify the sun, moon, flowers, and trees, and regard them as benevolent companions. Perhaps we are all born with this kind of intuition and kindness. I believe that there are many people who can influence environmental events with their beliefs, and that a collective mind will have exponential effects. Many natural disasters are about to happen for the purpose of great transformation and purification in the near future. If our collective minds believe in and communicate with these physical forces, we will reduce a lot of casualties caused by such disasters. Instead of using scientific equipment to fight against them, we could simply handle them by acknowledging their consciousness and treating them as friends. From ancient knowledge and channeled messages under hypnosis with higher spiritual beings, I have learned that only love and compassion will raise the vibrations of people and the land and lessen the effects of these disasters. Dr. Masaru Emoto, an internationally acclaimed researcher on consciousness in water, has discovered evidence of how our thoughts will affect the shapes of water crystals. There is evidence of non-locality of changes, of how our thoughts travel and instantly affect the quantum field. I met Dr. Emoto at a conference, where he joked with me about influencing the earthquakes. I told him that it would be easier to mobilize the wind and rain first. I know that he is more in-depth than what he has disclosed to the world. His research has been criticized by some scientists who say that it is pseudoscience, that there is no 100% proof, and that it could be affected by many other factors. May I ask, when scientists make certain propositions before doing their controlled experiments, can they conclude that there is a 100% proof while ignoring all other factors happening simultaneously in this universe? Perhaps my legal training teaches me otherwise. A lawyer's standard of proof is less than that of a scientist. We do not need 100% proof. We only need to prove on a balance of probability or beyond reasonable doubt. An open heart to accept the existence of certain phenomena without negative criticism is a great leap forward to human evolution. Linki. If we are all precipitations from a higher vibrational state, a source energy, then we are all sentient beings and are all connected. Linki is expressing this concept in her thoughts and words, which are echoed by the astounding revelations of modern physics. We are, at our core, consciousness and physicality, some flux of particle and wave, and as we change polarities, some identical flux of particle and wave at the other end of the universe may be experiencing an instantaneous complementary shift of polarity in reaction to our change. We inhabit an amazing cosmos where miracles occur constantly, just beyond our everyday minds. The concepts of religion and spirituality can coincide, but they are not synonymous. Religion can indeed pave the way for great acts of love, charity, and compassion, or it can be used as an excuse for separation, violence, and cruelty. At the heart of all religions, however, is love. The next few stories demonstrate how religion can be the avenue to greater spiritual wisdom. Day of Atonement. One of my favorite experiences was on Yom Kippur about 10 years ago. I am not Jewish, but I find this to be one of the most meaningful religious holidays. I envisioned myself standing on a stage in a large auditorium. Facing the empty seats, I began to pray that all those whom I had injured or wronged at any time in my existence would please come to the auditorium and take a seat. I wanted an opportunity to express my deepest remorse to them all. Instantly the seats began to fill up, until the auditorium was about 3/4 full. I was astonished and ashamed to see so many people there. Then I began to talk about my regrets, my spiritual search, and the growths that I felt I was making, and I apologized to each person for any wrongdoing for which I was responsible. I asked them to forgive me if they could. After I had spoken and thanked them for coming, they all stood up in front of their seats, held hands, and sang, "Let there be peace on earth." When the last note faded, they all disappeared as quickly and quietly as they had come, leaving me standing there on the stage in awe. Donna West. When repentance is heartfelt, and when forgiving and being forgiven is sincere, then the slate is wiped clean, the auditorium is emptied. When there is no urge to hurt anyone or anything, there will finally be peace on earth. Angels and Demons. I was at one of your conferences in November 2010. After lunch, I returned tired and with a headache. I was very concerned that falling asleep was unavoidable and feared that I'd be the snoring person whom someone would have to wake. After settling down on the floor, I thought, "Oh no, I am going to fall asleep. I did not go to this conference to nap."